Hey everybody, and welcome to the Botanical Biohacking Podcast. Today I want to talk about mental illness, particularly bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is something which has affected me personally. Not that I have bipolar disorder, however, my father did and still does. As a result, I've had a particular place of compassion for people suffering from this illness and its underlying causes as well. Changes in synaptic or neural plasticity are really what's associated with many psychiatric disorders, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and major depressive disorder, and even Alzheimer's. Gaseous neurotransmitters, or gasotransmitters, such as hydrogen sulfide, nitric oxide, and carbon monoxide, play roles in maintaining synaptic plasticity and in helping to restoring the optimal settings of these gasotransmitters may restore the synaptic plasticity and proper functioning. So what are these gasotransmitters? They're gaseous signaling molecules which meet all of the traditional definitions of qi. So if you've heard of qi or ki in East Asian martial arts or medicine, this is sometimes called an energy. Energy isn't quite right because qi literally means gas, and even without measurement capacity for gasotransmitters, the ancient Chinese were able to observe a gas-centered approach to physiology. And this turned out to be correct. Chinese medicine advocates the smooth function and distribution of qi, or gas. Too much or too little in a given area contributes to disease states. Gasotransmitters work the same way. Having too much in one place causes a type of inflammatory heat. Having too little reduces ATP production, and it is also associated with disease states. Without the ATP production, the sodium potassium pumps are going to fall offline, the body's going to start flooding. So you can have too much in one area and too little in another, and this exactly coincides with the way that Chinese medicine has viewed qi. Gasotransmitters have also been found to exit acupuncture points, and the use of acupuncture needles can accelerate the release or stimulate the production of these gases. Now, having too much in one area causes inflammation, and this signals mucus production. This mucus is at the center of neuroendocrine disorders and chronic disease in general in Chinese medicine. And it turns out that this mucus itself is a sort of microbiome, and it is gardened by way of our gasotransmitters. Number of studies in animal models indicate that the mucosal microbiome may influence cognition and behavior by altering the function of the immune system. It is likely that the microbiome plays a role in human psychiatric disorders. So we have gasotransmitters and the way that they interact with microbiota, and the way they're interacting with these gasotransmitters. And in between all of this, we have the mucosal microbiome, which seems to play a role in psychiatric disorders. The oropharyngeal microbiota is different when people have schizophrenia versus controls. GI inflammation is associated, it's increased in schizophrenia and for bipolar disorder. And it's been shown that antibiotics may alter the microbiome and affect psychiatric symptoms. To get a deeper understanding of this, let's take a look into Chinese medicine in the 1300s. And this time is very, very important because it's a period in Chinese history where the average person's diet began to shift. Before that, it was mainly plant-based, but with the Mongol invasion and the influence of Central Asian culture and this pastoral lifestyle, people began to eat meat and cheese and have banquets with large amounts of alcohol. So basically, meat consumption, dairy, these are all at levels that we see in the West today. And this is why it's such an important time period for us to look at, this Yuan dynasty. For us in the present, it's very important for us to look at this time period and the incredible doctors that came out of that. And one of these doctors is named Zhu Dan Xi, and he wrote in Dan Xi Xinfa. So this is called Dan Xi's Heart Method in 1347. he wrote about a disease category called dianquang. And this means being withdrawn and kind of listless or being insane. The character for Kuang is like an animal plus a king. So you can think of this person like being king of the beasts. And this is describing mania. This is depression, mania, literally. And this is said at this time to mostly, not all the time, but mostly be caused by mucus accumulating in the heart and chest. So in the Yuan dynasty, with this huge spike in drinking, dairy, and meat consumption, medicine changes. And the prevailing thought starts to change, and it has to do with digestion being the culprit. And it has to do with mucus, which is said to be created in the digestive system and then stored in the lungs. It's stored in the chest. So they say it's created in the middle and it's stored in the upper areas of the body. He describes the characteristics of this starting with depression, listlessness, a cold expression. So, hey, do you want to go out and do something? Not a lot of expression, less responsiveness. Also describes people talking to themselves and having illogical conclusions, fluctuating emotions, and a poor appetite. He described the polymicrobial biofilm on the tongue coating, as being greasy and thick, the pulse quality as feeling slippery or thin. And he used a special formula for this called 熏气导坦糖. You can actually make this formula yourself simply by combining a couple botanical biohacking products. If you take MicroGuard Plus and then add Warm Hearth to it, you actually already make this formula, and that's no accident. Zhu Dan Xi and the Yuan dynasty physicians have gone heavily into the creation of botanical biohacking products, and it's because we recognize that the diet that they had is the most similar to what we have today, and the problems they were experiencing most closely reflect what we have today. Now, this is not 100% the same formula because we're not 100% the same people. What we found is by working with gasotransmitters and the gut microbiome, people find that their depression becomes alleviated as they lose weight and find their energy levels increasing. There's one case in particular, and in actuality, it's a combination of about 3 cases. I've changed some details to maintain the person's anonymity. But she started with depressed eating, particularly around menstruation. She found that she had gained weight at first, and then found it harder and harder to get out of bed in the morning. This is a sign of what we consider internal dampness or gut dysbiosis. And at this point, the gut dysbiosis is starting to take hold, and some of her behavior is already being very heavily microbially inspired. Her appetite went up, particularly for sweets. She ballooned in weight, and pretty soon her husband mentioned that she was snoring. The quality of her sleep was declining. Her dreams became more vivid and less restful. And her waking life, she said, it seemed to be like a fog. It was kind of a dreamy haze. This is what some people described as brain fog. She would sleep and rest for most of the day or watch TV. If she was working, she was barely working and found herself taking lots of breaks for social media. And she only got spikes of energy at night. Her chronobiology was getting off kilter. Because she wasn't sleepy at night, she would sleep in another room. She began waking up later in the day, around 2 or 3 o'clock, and she began getting strange kind of aches in her body. She started to crave comfort foods, and she mentioned that one day she just kind of became hypersexual. And this wasn't in alignment with her behavior before she was married or during her marriage. It was something pretty completely new. And it hadn't come from meeting somebody new who was really special or whatever. It had just kind of come out of the blue. And she started acting on this oftentimes indiscriminately. And it was kind of like whoever was around. And she would be really pushy about them having sex with her, to the point that some people were refusing, understandably, because they thought maybe she was a little bit off. And she said that it was it was like she was watching it happen. It wasn't like something she even felt control of. Through the haze, she remembered her husband yelling and getting angry, and she just remembers withdrawing even more. That he was yelling, and it was like his yelling became quieter because she was just kind of tuned out. Then the days just kind of went by. He was gone. Stuff was gone. There was more space in the house. Then the house was getting dirty. She didn't have energy to clean it. She was unable to work well, so she started cutting back her hours. She's kind of a consulting position, so she could make her own time that way. And when she came in to see me, it was because, well, officially it was for weight loss. But I found out later her family had actually had an intervention with her and said, look, something's wrong with you. What was said in her case is that much of her behavior came with a lot of judgment. From the outside, it was like, it looked like she lacked impulse control, and she would see that and then really hate herself as a result. And honestly, it was making other people hate her too. However, another way to view this, aside from, maybe viewing it as a moral failing, is that her brain was malfunctioning because it was in a state of inflammation and it was getting hijacked by pathogenic microbiota. They were ordering the foods they wanted. They were affecting her circadian rhythms, and it's possible that they may have influenced sexual behavior as well, because it's a great way for diseases to spread. Her mouth was dry, but she didn't feel like drinking water. And this is a very important symptom. She would drink chocolate milk or sweetened drinks, but she didn't feel like drinking water. This is often a sign that water metabolism is not working well. One of the strategies fungi and yeast use to destroy their host is to attack your water pumps in order to cause flooding. Lacking thirst while having dark urine is a sign that this may be happening. Her bowel movements altered between constipation and diarrhea, and this also seemed to shift based on whether she was in a more manic state or a more depressive state. And this also gives me an indication that this alternating of constipation, diarrhea, her gut microbiome is shifting pretty quickly. And this shift is associated with the bipolar alterations between the mania and depression. Now, is the mania causing inflammation, which is causing the digestive symptoms? Yes. Are the digestive symptoms also causing the mania and depression? Yes. This is a feedback loop, and to pinpoint which one is causing becomes very, very tricky. We can say that there's an association, there's a relationship there. And ultimately, to take care of it, we want to be working as much as we can with both. Unfortunately, for this young woman, she had picked up a UTI and yeast infections, and probably because of her increased sexual activity while she was in the manic stages. So after her initial consult, I started her on Microguard Plus, Warm Hearth Tea, and Wind Tea, which is, if you combine those together, it's almost exactly what Zhu Dan Xi was doing, but with some alterations. So from a traditional perspective, we're looking at a combination of Baoji, Erchen, Erju, Xiaochaihu, and Sanrentang. As she was on this, I had her doing abdominal massage twice a day for weight loss. The result was that she was farting and burping a lot. The first change that she noticed was that she actually felt like drinking water, and her cravings for non-nutritious food reduced by about half within the first few days. 2 to 3 days is the average time that we see changes within the gut microbiome as a whole. So the herbs, in combination with the digestive abdominal massage and some of the other Qigong exercises. And just to go, Qigong literally means Qi work, or I call it gasotransmitter therapy. You're using intermittent hypoxia and hyperpoxia in order to stimulate the smooth flow of gasotransmitters in the body, smooth flow of Qi in the body. And this will itself help to remove mold toxins and also kill pathogens that shouldn't be there. It's a very useful therapy. This is because for aflatoxins and mold toxins to get out of the body, they need a sweet spot of nitric oxide, and they also need a sweet spot of microbial diversity to eat them away. So the combination of this is very good in my experience. So after a week, she started to feel like she was waking up. Her brain fog was lifting, and she was feeling tired at night. This was a huge win, because at this point, I knew she was going to have a good chance of recovery. When people are off of their sleep cycles, it is very difficult to treat bipolar disorder. In fact, blue blocker glasses are incredible for people with bipolar disorder, simply because they can block blue light, which can hinder the natural spike in melatonin people are supposed to get back to sleep. There are various psychiatrists who are using blue blocker glasses just to help stabilize people with bipolar disorder, and that alone seems to be helping pretty significantly. So yes, the gut microbiota are very good, and yes, trying to manage emotional states and artificial light is a big part of the neuroendocrine system in our chronobiology. So thank God she started to get more sleep at night, and it was easier for her to wake up in the morning. Before, even if she had a lot of sleep, it was very difficult for her to get up and get going. Part of this is because her body was flooded, and as the water started to drain off, it was much easier for her to get up and get going. So within this first week, she dropped 10 pounds. Now, that sounds awesome, and it is, because she got swamp water out of the body, but it is water weight. So I let her know that a lot of this was extracellular fluid rather than fat. So don't get too giddy about the weight loss. However, by draining off that fluid, it's draining the swamp, and now a lot of those pathogens wouldn't be able to survive. So that was worth celebrating. I let her know that this would likely return, the weight would return, and she would probably be actually heavier, but with any luck, the water would not be in the extracellular space. It would be back in the cells where it belonged. As she got stronger, I encouraged her to go to a sauna a few times a week to get her fluid metabolism working and creating a more febrile state that pathogenic fungi don't seem to like. Really, I just wanted to keep fluids moving. I wanted urination, defecation, sweating. That's how you get damp out. That's how your body naturally responds to fungi and pathogenic microbiota. Sweating is an important aspect of this, and being unable to sweat or sweating too much, both of these conditions are associated with deregulations and nitric oxide. And the act of sweating regularly can help to improve the distribution of nitric oxide, and it helps with gut microbiota as well. Within 2 weeks, her tongue was still fat. However, it had a thinner polymicrobial biofilm. So this let me know that, yes, some of the water weight was going down, but there was still plenty there. However, it wasn't as much as there was before in terms of it feeding the biofilm through the GI tract. So some of that bacterial, fungal, viral activity, that metabolism was dying down. Her pulse was less slippery. Slippery pulses basically mean there's a state of inflammation and there's a lot of junk in the blood. So it can be high blood lipids, it can be high blood sugar. It gives it that feel. This is a very subjective art in pulse taking. However, it is very useful. Her UTI and yeast infection symptoms were still there, so I added a formula called Aquata, which is Armiawan. At week 3, she had lost 7 pounds consistently, and her UTI and yeast infection symptoms decreased. She was sleeping earlier and waking up with the sun. This is great. Chronobiology is syncing right up, and it looks like removing the gut microbiota as influencing the chronobiology seem to be the stick in the spokes. So sometimes it goes the other way, but when people have eaten weird food and then suddenly they can't sleep, that kind of insomnia, those kind of disturbances to chronobiology, generally once you affect the gut microbiota, they restore back to normal fairly quickly. Her thirst was normal and her bowel movement stabilized. She wasn't sure if she was still snoring because she didn't have a partner anymore, but she felt like her breathing was less constricted, so she thought that her breathing was better. At a month in, her face was visibly thinner and her eyes had greater clarity. So the sclera of the eyes, it's used as a marker of inflammation. When there's generalized inflammation, people often get red eyes. If they're not sleeping well because of, inflammation or poor sleep causing that inflammation, then we get redness in the eyes. So that clarity was really good to see. Her facial expressions were easier as well, and her responses seemed more appropriate compared to the first consultation, where she was a little bit off. Her tongue shape had become thinner and her pulse felt smooth, but it was a little bit weak. And this is when I know at this point that the condition has gone from full to empty. So the first thing we were doing is a bit of an attack strategy. And now once everything's getting evened out, but she's feeling a bit weak, I'm going to transition at these times to something that's a bit more supportive. So I stopped giving her wind tea, which is Sanren and Xiaochaihu, but I kept her on Microguard Plus, which is kind of like Baoji and Yuejuan kind of ideas, and then added So, or Lingwei Zhugan. Her UTI and yeast infection had cleared up, so I had her stop taking Aquata, Armiang. It wasn't necessary at this point. After a week of this, her energy levels began to increase and she was feeling warmth and life return to her. After a week of this, I had her move to Lift pills, which is Buchongichi, and Microguard Plus. So at this point, she had dropped about 20 pounds consistently, had started walking for exercise, and was back to working. The gut-based depression had lifted, but she was still dealing with the emotional loss of her marriage, and her reputation at work had obviously suffered because she wasn't as consistent, and her friends and family, she felt that they had been looking down on her or judging her. And I think a biggest part of this was that she felt pretty ashamed, and it was hard. It was a hard time for her. Her condition stabilized and she continued to do Tai Chi and meditation as a way to maintain balance of her gasotransmitters and gut microbiome. Activities like meditation and Tai Chi have been shown to have regulatory effects on nitric oxide, so I suggested those as lifestyle methods so that she wouldn't need to be on herbs forever and that she could really take control of her inflammatory system so that she could keep the bipolar disorder as much under her control as she could. And it seemed to be working out really well. She also found that gardening helped her to stay grounded, which is probably a good thing as she had extra exposure to more diversity of microbiota. One of the conversations she had with me during a checkup a few months later was that she wasn't really sure who she was. If she had decided, you know what, I'm going to just stay home and eat pies and sleep with whomever I want, whenever I want, if that was a decision that she had made consciously, she could live with it and say that's what she wanted. At least it would have been in her own hands, and she could own that decision. Yet it didn't feel like it was to her. It felt like she was in a haze or a fog. It wasn't typical of her personality. Not in her younger days, not before or since. But if, on the other hand, it was inspired by various microbes, then that's almost worse. That she could have been under a fog or a kind of spell that was influencing her behavior to such a degree was a bit terrifying to her. Her diet and sexual behavior are today back on line with what it was before she got sick, and she sits with these questions in the back of her mind. To what degree is she herself, and to what degree is she under microbial influence? I have no way to help her answer that because extroversion, introversion, whether we like extreme sports, whether you're a cat or a dog person, and many other aspects of our personality and appearance are directly influenced by gut microbiota. Her story and the stories of those like her inspired me to write In Light and Weight, Cultivate the Garden Within. And this is because obesity, depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia share a common backdrop of gut dysbiosis and gasotransmitter deregulation. Every day this fluctuates, and every day it influences our psycho, neuro, gaso, and enteroendocrine system. As it tips for us all, we slide along the spectrum of sanity, doing our best to cultivate internal stability in a world marked by constant change.